Welcome to Legal Tech Live, episode 83. I'm your host, Nick Rishwain, and we're here today with Jorge Izquierdo of the Aragon Project in Aragon.one. He is the CEO and founder, and almost to be expected from anybody working in decentralized autonomous organizations or blockchain. He is a curious hacker and researcher pushing to make the decentralized web happen, and that is the bio on the website. So always with the blockchain folks, very light on the bios, which I always enjoy. Jorge, thank you for coming on the show. My guest co-host today is Adam Kerpelman, the Kerp with Juris or getjuris.com. And Adam is a knowledgeable individual in blockchain, which is why I have asked him to join me, because I am entry level. Jorge, thanks for being here today. Thanks for agreeing to do this. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you journeyed into the Aragon project.
Yeah, awesome. First of all, thanks for having me, Nick. Super excited to be in the show. Got started with tech fairly early on, doing several projects. And in 2016, I started working with my co-founder Luis in a different project. Also had legal relations. We started a project called Unpatent, in which we tried to take down bad patents that patent trolls were abusing against companies that were innovating. And it is throughout that project that we started getting really into Ethereum and developing things in the platform, namely an insurance vehicle, a decentralized insurance vehicle. In this case, what we wanted to do with it is an insurance pool that companies could use so that they were protected in case that a patent troll went against them. So that was kind of my first deep introduction into developing a decentralized application, a decentralized system in this case. And then from that, we kind of shifted into Aragon, seeing how that system, that insurance thing that we had built, that it could be, we saw the power of the technology, and that we could really design any kind of organization, and not just an insurance pool. So that's kind of how we got into Aragon.
Excellent. And naturally, Aragon, there's two different parts to Aragon, aren't there? There's the Aragon.one, which is the company, and the Aragon project, which essentially is what kind of caught my attention with the digital jurisdictions and dispute resolution. I called it ODR because it's just another version of online dispute resolution. But tell us about the differences between the company and the project, if you would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the how the project got started, we started working on the software for people to run. Back then, we were really focused on digital companies, right? Companies on the blockchain. And then we kind of started going into this direction that you could really run organizations that do not necessarily need to be incorporated with any state. So that's when we came up with the idea of the Aragon network, which is kind of we call it a digital jurisdiction, but what it is really is like a set of services that these digital organizations that are fully sovereign may need in order for them to flourish and be able to operate in an efficient way. And one of these important services, the first one that was built, is Aragon Court, which is kind of this digital jurisdiction in which these organizations can go and resolve disputes if they have them, and really just put some extra assurances when people run the organizations. So that would be the Aragon network, and that we did a token sale back in 2017, so at that point, it made sense to kind of separate kind of the project, which is stewarded by a nonprofit association in Switzerland, and then kind of the company that that builds the software that is kind of a separate entity.
Excellent. Kerp, feel free to jump in when you're ready.
You got it. Yeah, I think my impulse is to jump down all kinds of weird rabbit holes about like shelling points and stuff. And as it relates to trying to build, essentially a crowd jury software. But I think maybe a place to start is a little bit further back and sort of, Nick mentioned before we started recording that I kind of gave him like the quick rundown on, hey, get caught up on here are a few things to get you to the point where you're like, okay, now you have the tools to understand decentralized like web systems. I almost wonder, like, Nick, do you have anything you think we should cover first in that space to sort of understand what, because like talking about building software for organizations, what Aragon is building is a very different thing than just sort of the idea of like, hey, it facilitates shareholder meetings. It's like, no, it's kind of a much bigger thing, but it's sort of built on the back of this enabling technology. That's where the buzzwords, it's exactly where the like mind blown part lives, but also where all the buzzwords show up and people are like blockchain, whatever.
Right.
So.
Maybe you could, maybe Jorge, you could break it down, because I do know, I want to thank Megan Ma and Ivan Rasich for being here in the Zoom room, and over on Facebook Live, we've got Jim Hacking and Morris Lilienthal. So thank you all for watching. Maybe you can give us like a very early stage, what does a decentralized autonomous organization do? How does it work? What do we mean by decentralized? Because I know that sometimes is just one of those basics that a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah, this is like really not an easy question. The way that I explain it, like from like 1,000 miles over, it's kind of like if people are familiar with Bitcoin, which is like kind of proving that you don't need you can have a currency that is not backed by a state. We can talk about DAOs as, okay, you can have these organizations that are not backed or by any state either. It's just like a completely digital thing. The interesting thing about decentralized autonomous organizations are these live organizations, almost even live beings, in which like you can have these specific rules of engagement, like how do you become part of the organization, what can you do for you to get a greater share of the organization, how can you profit from being in the organization, and also what are the rules for this organization to make decisions and also self-evolved. And an interesting notion of the decentralized and autonomous aspect of it is that as opposed to a traditional corporation in which you have a very rigid corporate structure, here you can have organizations that you don't have a CEO for, that they're structured in a more fluid way, and they don't rely on like one particular person to keep on running, and that anyone can come in and like operate in the organization. And of course, as we're seeing with these organizations, they're like more motivated participants that kind of like push the organization forward, but they not necessarily have like this special role. And it's just that they're more involved, and they get other people to do these things. So yeah, kind of a long answer to say that this like these new types of organizations that they don't rely on like specific people doing these some functions, that they can be open and people can join and leave the organization. And then another thing is that by being digital and living on password forbid by being on the blockchain, that there are a lot of things that happen automatically, and you don't have a lot of paperwork to do, or a lot of things that come with traditional corporations.
And what I was going to say, you got there sort of at the end, that I think is interesting, is like the people get stuck on the decentralization because that's what gives it sort of certain, a censorship resistant, sort of privacy related things. And everybody likes to talk about that. But what we're really just talking about is, what if in the places where, if it's easy for us as lawyers to think about like business arrangements and business agreements, right? But what if you had, instead of a written contract, written in essentially human code that says, I promise to do blah, blah, blah in human language. With computers, you can write code that can't be any other way because it's executed by the computer. And so at its core, what Aragon is building is this system to allow that collaboration to happen in a way where what I think you guys are really chasing is ultimately probably described as something like direct democracy. Like, what does it look like if the shareholders who could vote in a company actually all show up and vote and can actually get stuff, and it, partially because it's easy, right? I mean, like, I own Apple stock. I've never voted in a shareholder vote because I got to mail in a thing or I got to show up in person. And so ultimately, like, the blockchain and the decentralization as it relates to Aragon is almost secondary to the idea of, can we use this new technology that's emerged to really impact the way that people interact with one another, and especially cooperate with one another, which is sort of a lot of it is emergent from like open source software and stuff. And I can say from my personal perspective, I'm in a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, although we've chosen not to be anonymous, right? So it's another version of that but like it's all made up of lawyers or legal engineers. We're called LexDAO, and it's been really interesting watching the whole thing take shape, because it's when everyone gets an equal vote on everything, it's not like coming together as a company. We're up to something like 30 members, but we still have interesting aspects of it that feel very small startup-y, insofar as like you need buy-in from a majority of voters to pass certain things. And so we end up having these, sort of emergent roles where some people speak up more than others and some organize more than others. And some, people are good at one thing or another thing. But to what you were saying, it makes it a very different like, I was brought in when there are already 20 people in there. And it's so different than getting onboarded at a company. Even if you're the 20th employee, like, you get hired, the HR person gives you your stuff and you kind of whatever. DAOs are, and so one of the things I've noticed with the DAO culture, and this might just be a matter of how software groups behave, because you can kind of say the same things about like early Linux, but like, it's just fun. Like, there's groups like Metacartel that it's what they're doing is so wild, legit. I mean, they're doing real work, but it's so goofy that when you look at it from the outside, you're kind of like, I don't know about these guys. But then even within LexDAO, we're trying to find ways to, have it be a group of lawyers working on legal problems without losing the fact that, like, the people here, like, are all gamers, probably. Like, we're all streaming on Twitch or something after we're done with their legal work or whatever, right? It's like, and so we have these things where it's like, okay, do we want to present the things you need to know as a group of lessons or a group of bounty-based quests where you've, now go vanquish the blah, blah, blah. Like, there's no reason we can't teach you legal decentralized concepts while still and having fun is how you grow one of those organizations, because people come in and they go, yeah, that's I like hanging out here. And one of the key things to that is anybody can leave at any time in the organization of most of these things. So, but anyway, so that all comes back to agreements, right? So you can imagine where lawyers live right at that thing of going, okay, and this is how I got sucked into blockchain, because people started coming to me and going, okay, here's this idea of how this thing can exist, but we're humans, and humans are gonna human, and we're gonna start fighting with one another. So, like, what do we do now?
Which is what I'm reading on the Aragon website. This is about building a community, right? And in communities, disputes occur. So what kind of disputes does Aragon how are you working that, the project? How are you working that? You guys are working on, your website says, Aragon gives internet communities unprecedented power to organize around shared values and resources. Hence LexDAO, as Adam was referring to. That's a group of like-minded people, legal engineers and lawyers who are interested in how we get to this next stage, or Web3 stage, as Adam has indicated it's called. So what disputes is the Aragon Project working on in a dispute resolution, rather, for their communities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of giving a little bit more context into what Adam was saying. Traditional companies or corporations are like you'll know based on a set of agreements, right? And kind of as a software engineer, something that was a fun realization is that if you want to know what the final state of a company is, right? How does it work? What are the rules of engagement? You have kind of like that a series of pieces of paper since the company was created, and you have to kind of like go see it, and you can kind of figure out what the current state is, right? So it's kind of like this stack of paper. With software-based organizations and DAOs, you kind of have like that final state that is code, and you can very easily see, okay, this is how it is. If I need to pass a vote for in order to do this is what I need to do, and it's all very clear. The thing with that is that code is also like very rigid, right? You have your rules of, okay, if there's we have our DAO, and if there's a majority vote that passes, we can transfer funds somewhere else, right? But something that the software cannot understand is like the intent of that, or what the purpose is, and that is like something that it's either impossible. It's like just impossible to put in code and put in software. And for a program, for a smart contract, it actually looks the same, like a transfer of all the assets in the organization. Imagine that there's a vote to transfer all the assets of the organization into another address somewhere else, right? And there can be two situations in which like you might want to do that, right? There's a bug that has been found in the code, which is something that is you need to be very careful with. That there's a bug in the code, so we're gonna do a vote to move all our funds somewhere else that doesn't have the bug, so we don't lose our money. So you kind of like recreate the organization somewhere else, and you do a vote in order to do that. But you can also do a vote to transfer all the funds, in which you say, okay, we're going to transfer all these funds to this other contract that only the people that vote yes to moving the funds are gonna get a share of it. So you basically are still you're colluding with a set of the organization to take the funds somewhere else, and only the people that were voting yes to that are gonna get it. So for a computer program, these two transfers in which like in one, you're just doing like, there's a problem, we need to move this somewhere else, but just like totally fine. And something that you're attacking the organization and basically colluding with some shareholders to steal from other shareholders. For a computer program, like these two things are gonna be looking the same. It's like we're moving all of our money from one place to another. In one case, that's totally legitimate, and like the faster that it happens, better, because otherwise you can get all your money stolen because of the bag. But in the other one, you're kind of stealing from these people in what it's called 51% attack. So if you don't have recourse to go after against the people that do this latter thing, you have this organization that just gets stolen, and nothing can happen, because like you cannot like undo the money transfer, and the people that are interacting in the organization could be anonymous, could be pseudonymous, so you cannot really go after them. So that is when where this type of dispute resolution comes in handy, because like even though there are a lot of advantages of having smart contract based organizations that you have a lot of certainty of how they're going to act, there's sometimes that kind of like human subjectivity of understanding and context that you cannot just put into a smart contract. So those are the types of disputes that we're focusing on. So through this project that we're calling Aragon Agreements, what we want to allow is to for certain actions in the organization that you can not only have the software rules of like how can that happen, but that you can have a legal, well, not a legal, but like a human readable agreement or text that kind of governs like under which conditions or what rules that transactions should be, or those actions should be governed over. And then people can see what is happening. And if they think that a certain action is against the agreement, you can then put that through this the dispute resolution protocol, and then whoever wasn't in the right gets penalized, and the other person gets rewarded. But most importantly, you can have this recourse of blocking actions before they happen, if the motive or the purpose of the action isn't what the people agreed before, even if those are things that you cannot have in code.
Kerp, hit it.
It's an interesting, I mean, you talk about even the human element, but the reality is like computers aren't even perfect in this regard too. Like there are incomputable problems, right? If you can't write a piece of code that can tell you how long it'll take to run itself. It's just impossible. Like you can run the code, but it just throws an error because it's literally incomputable. A computer can't do that math. But somebody could write that loop into a contract by mistake and lock the whole thing up. And then it causes the thing where you go, like a lot of the bugs you hear about on blockchain with blockchain projects result in locked funds where they're just like, yep, we can't complete this transaction, which means the idea they are out of one wallet have not yet been put in the next wallet and they're stuck, right? Weird things like that happen. I think the cool thing, though, when it comes to running organizations is really sort of to give people who maybe don't know the technical side as much, like there are aspects of Aragon's software where, for example, our treasury is controlled by, what you call agent software. So money can't be moved in or out of our communal bank account without a vote passing. So there's a secondary program that like we can't tell to execute that stuff because it's always going to check with a vote before it executes any code. And it just immediately creates a really interesting dynamic where instead of just having the occasional shareholder situation like you might experience in like corporate America, it's almost on some level like anytime the CEO wants to move some money, everybody who's paying attention might have a chance to block that. And it just creates a very different role, for the people who might be the leaders in the organization, stuff like that. I think I'm curious, to what extent, Aragon's an open source project, right? So functionally, I'd imagine you guys run a lot of your stuff. I mean, I hang out in your Discord. I've talked to a bunch of members of the team through Lexdown and stuff. So I get a sense, I have an understanding to a degree of to what extent it is this way, but I'm curious to what extent you're running Aragon itself, just sort of in a decentralized fashion. Does your team live all over the place and you're just kind of, in online spaces, and how many of your decisions go to a vote, for example, like code?
That's a good question. Yeah.
Code base. It's always fun to chase that down with blockchain. Like the projects, they're all structured different from what we're used to as business people in the US. It's fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, as internally, we use Aragon for day-to-day operations. So both the company and like the nonprofit, they run most of the operations using Aragon organizations. And then with regards to project governance, it's something that is kind of in transition right now. But yeah, this is we went from we had this initial project, the initial process called the AGP process, in which people could do Aragon governance proposals for funding different things, but it was kind of like a signaling mechanism that then the nonprofit would hear what the community would say in votes, and then operate. And now we're developing the Aragon Network DAO, which will be able to force certain type of actions that can happen on chain. For example, like parameterizing an Aragon court, like choosing what the parameters for things should be, what the fees are, and those actions will be able to be taken directly by ANT holders. So at the moment, we're kind of in this transitioning phase, but we do use our tools quite a bit.
It's no, sorry, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, we've got actually a couple of questions from, we've got Ashley Pepitone over on the Facebook page, who realizes she's not asking a legal tech question, but she's just trying to identify your accent. Jorge, where are you from? I told her you are in Switzerland right now. Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Spain.
From Spain. Okay.
Yeah. Great
question. Really getting to the heart of it here, Ashley. I appreciate that. And we've got Scott Stevenson here in Zoom, who asks, what is the governance structure? What is the voting at the highest level? Do they use their own Aragon DAO, or like LexDAO uses, or how does that work? So how is your voting structure set up? And then I do want to spend some time on the actual Aragon court, because that I think is really interesting, and I've shared that court link in.
It's kind of what started this whole thing.
That's what started the whole thing. So I want to make sure we get to that for our viewers. But yeah,
definitely.
Tell us about the structure.
Yeah, so as I was saying, this is something that is right now is kind of transitioning from this pure signaling process to this new DAO. So the Aragon Network DAO, it's kind of going through this phase launch. The first of which was launching Aragon Court, because the Aragon Network DAO relies on Aragon Court in order for be able to have this 51% attack protection that we were talking about before. So it's kind of in this transitioning process, but the gist of the idea is that ANT holders will be the top level authority for in this DAO, and that the proposals that go through this DAO will be bound by an Aragon agreement, so that if there are malicious proposals that go against this agreement, these cannot even be voted on, right? So there's this mechanism that people will be able to put to Aragon court whether a proposal is even valid to begin with. So it doesn't matter if like 51% of the token holders want to pass something to like steal from the rest of the token holders. Like those types of proposals shouldn't even be voted on, and they should be able to put to the court to evaluate whether that goes against the agreement, and then if the proposal is valid, then it can be voted on. If no one even takes it to court, then it can just be voted on. But this is kind of like this special mechanism that needs to be there to make sure that there aren't any attacks to the governance by a malicious majority.
So I think maybe you mentioned the ANT token there, right? So so this is the place where I think I'll get us to the court, Nick, but we should start a tiny bit further back in terms of just understanding the dynamics of the system, which even goes back to how you raised the initial funding. So like you said, you had a token sale in 2017. I can't remember how much you guys raised, but it was a lot. And the way that token sale works is kind of, there's questions about the specifics, but for the understanding of how we think about it, people are giving you money to work on the project that you pitched. In exchange for that, they're going to get back these tokens either somewhere down the line or immediately, or it depends on how everything is structured within one of these projects. It's pretty common to have, I think, what you've described, which where you end up with a foundation or possibly just a founder who is sort of like the benevolent dictator at the beginning. And I completely understand that as someone who manages software projects. Like at the beginning, you kind of just have to have somebody that goes, no, just do this, just keep moving, just do this, just keep moving. But then the idea eventually is to roll, because it's an open source project and ultimately like a protocol, it's to roll it over to community governance. And so the way you do that governance within a system is everyone who has tokens can vote, and you get to vote with as many tokens as you have by some dynamic. You know, there's a lot of ways to manipulate that when you start to play with the game theory and the math and stuff. And so what you're saying is ultimately the idea is right now, there are still a lot of decisions getting made from the incoming signal from the community, from talking to the community, from talking to your users, the usual software kind of stuff. And then ultimately the foundation kind of makes a call on, okay, this is what we need to build. But the goal, and you guys have stated this from the beginning, is to eventually roll over to anyone who has these A&T tokens has an equivalent vote in the system, just like shareholders would in a corporation, except because it's a DAO, it's kind of even more powerful position than just a regular shareholder. And so this gets us to the court because, you know, there's going to be disputes among people regarding these decisions for all the reasons you just said, right? Malicious things, political things, just stupid infighting, just, you know, human behavior, right? And so what happened that caused us that brought this across Nick's radar, which then caused him to talk to me and go, you know, blockchain things, right?
Which is very similar to the way I said it. Being essentially a layperson in this, in Adam onboarding me into blockchain, the phrase may have been, you know, blockchain things, right?
Yeah,
that could have been very accurate there.
And I said, oh, do I ever? So what happened was, you know, like the headlines started to show up about Tim Draper putting money into the token that sort of, you know, that is the underlying sort of functional piece of how the court works via the same dynamics I was just describing. And it's interesting because, I mean, immediately I'm having to, like, I feel very much like a lawyer when people ask me, because I go, it's like when you ask a lawyer a question, the answer is always, it depends. Even in this case, it's sort of the idea that he bought those tokens. I mean, it does mean that there's cash flowing into that system, right? But ultimately, he just picked up these tokens. It's not like he bought stock in your company like a traditional investment. And so immediately, like Nick said, hey, what's the deal here? And I went, oh, there's so many layers. But I think it gets us into the court because, you know, the idea is you're building a court using the same dynamics. And so there's interesting things going on there. If you want to say, okay, what if your jury needs to be completely anonymous because we don't even know who you are? And what if we could have a jury where thousands of people vote instead of 12, you know, which is what you get in the US. And so maybe talk a little bit about, you know, it ultimately gets to like the cutting edge of novel ways that, like when we say ODR, we mean, oh, it's arbitration, but over Zoom.
Over Zoom.
Or like with a bit of facilitated sort of document generation in between.
Right.
Aragon Court is like all the way. I mean, this is a rabbit hole we can chase if you want. Like, it's so cutting edge that as a lawyer, I'm like, like with certain pieces of it, right? And this is the ongoing conversation I have with multiple people on the Aragon team. But like, you know, talk a little bit about sort of, I mean, this is where we get to the game theory and the like shelling points and weird dynamics that are introduced once you're talking about having 1,000 people vote, if that's sort of what you're after, right? But I think maybe from your perspective, talk about how you came to the structure for the court and sort of, you know, it starts with somebody triggers a dispute, right? And then kind of what happens from there. And then I'll try to pick apart how it's weird from the lawyer's perspective, used to the sort of boring paper court system that we live in.
Yeah, it's great. And we have Scott over here giving you a hard time with that, Adam, saying, ask a question, get to the question. But
That's
Scott,
the problem with technical topics, man. That's why we need hour podcasts instead of 5-minute
Yeah.
pieces on Bloomberg.
Yeah, I know this
Yeah.
is going to be a longer. We can go a little longer today. I'm in no rush. This is a Saturday. Please go ahead. Go ahead, Jorge.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So in terms of Aragon Court, and we've kind of been using the term Schelling point. So kind of the high level idea of Aragon Court is that you have, if you treat it kind of as this black box, what you want it is to ask the court a question. Is like, okay, these are like these two parties. This is what is going. This is what is going on. There's this text. They're defending this. They're defending that, and you kind of want the system to tell you either A or B as fast as possible. And that's kind of what you want. So the thing is, if you want to run this in a completely decentralized way, in a way that is like not cannot be censored, something that you cannot have is like you don't have identities for the people that will be making these decisions. So here you get into the first interesting aspect of the system, that is like you kind of have to pick randomly these jurors, but because you don't get their passport, you don't have anyone checking their identity, you kind of don't know if you could have one person like saying that they're 100 different jurors, right? Kind of like civil attacking the system. So the first thing that happens there is that you need to require jurors to have kind of a financial stake behind it, so that one, you can kind of reduce this possibility of having someone posting as 1,000 people. If rather than selecting based on people, you select based on this this financial stake, you kind of like select weighting based on this financial stake. And two, this also allows you, because you can have people that are completely anonymous, like you don't know who they are. Having this stake also allows you to have a way to penalize people if the system thinks that they did something that they shouldn't have, or they end in the losing side. So because of this kind of two reasons, you need to require this to have this sort of token for jurors to put up as kind of their stake or collateral for being one selected and what they can be penalized for. So this is with a token that gets derived from A&T, which is called A&J. So the way that it works is like jurors have A&T, and they kind of convert it into A&J, and they can become jurors. So when a dispute comes in, kind of going for the question, what the system does is it tries to start with like a very small set of jurors. So it kind of like looks at all the jurors in the system that can be selected, and kind of like picks 3 based on their stake. So say that you have 1,000 tokens. Each of the minimum amount of tokens that you need to be selected is 100, right? So kind of therefore, if you have 1,000, it's 100. You kind of get like 10 papers in kind of in a bag, and then everyone gets kind of their tickets, and there's someone like a random hand that picks up 3 papers, and those are your 3 jurors. And then at that point, you kind of ask them, hey, this is the case. This is the evidence that the different sides have produced. What is your take on this? How do you rule? And then they go through this committee reveal process, because of everything in the blockchain is public, and we don't want jurors to have a way to collude beforehand. By having like absolute certainty of what is the ruling going to be. They kind of have to first commit to a vote, which is basically putting their vote in a shield envelope, and then at some other point in the future, kind of like going there and unsealing the envelope. And at that point, we kind of tally up the votes are tallied up, and then we kind of see what the ruling that the majority of the jurors that were selected chose. And kind of going back a little bit and to what Adam was saying before, the interesting aspect of this is what jurors get asked by the protocol to do is saying, okay, what do you think your fellow jurors are gonna choose? And you're not asking that. What are your fellow jurors that just got selected? These other two people that got selected are gonna vote, are gonna rule on. But what would the entire system, the entire pool of Aragon court jurors, if we asked everyone, how would the court vote if we took everyone's vote into account? So we try to do this in like small rounds. So you have this juror, this initial round, votes are tallied up, and then you have kind of a period of time in which people can appeal. If there's an appeal, and that appeal gets confirmed by another party that wants to see that into a follow-on round, it kind of gets we go back to the beginning of the process, selecting more jurors, and then repeating this for a series of times until there are either no appeals or the case actually gets taken to the entire court.
I think
and at that point we would have a final ruling. Yeah.
A key piece to hit in that is sort of like if you're functioning as a juror, you're providing this service. Like the idea, correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason the whole thing works is because if you do side with the majority, which is to say you're right, then you get more money back out of the system for your stake than the people who were wrong. And so the game theory part that gets weird is at some volume, sort of economics and games theory, this is the Schelling point thing. Games theory tell us that we'll centralize around a right answer because everyone else is just trying to guess everyone else's answer instead of actually thinking about what's right. But when we do the math on those systems, it seems to work. So it is a system that mathematically will give us right answers, but in a space that gets, sort of relates to some of the questions I see James and Scott asking, which is kind of, that's so different a way of thinking about even how do we solve the dispute compared to where lawyers live, which is I'm going to make the answer based on, I'm going to make my argument based on law and or morals, and I'm going to convince these 12 people of it, and that's how I win this. And there's rules of evidence, and so immediately the questions in the chat are all oh God, how do we handle evidence? How do we handle
not only that
system,
not only that, Adam, but what you proposed, the way you said it about game theory and all that sounds like enough people get together, we're making a popular vote that may not be the right vote. From just a democracy standpoint, I'm feeling wait, how is this working? If you want to vote like other people who might vote right, if enough of those people got together, how do we make sure that that's a legitimate vote? What am I missing here? Besides a lot.
Yeah.
Keep it.
Besides a lot.
So the interesting aspect is that since jurors are kind of invested into the system, and as Adam was saying, you have these jurors that if they make they side with the majority, they are part of this winning ruling, they will get compensated. They are kind of have that financial stake because they're earning fees and tokens that way. So if you get into a point in which a dispute ends up being kind of this popular vote among the jurors, but that outside observers are hey, what is going on? This is obviously wrong, and people lose confidence into the system because they see what's going on and they're okay, I don't want anything to do with this resolving my disputes, and since it's not this is the court that you have in that jurisdiction, and if you don't like it, you're out of luck, since this system is purely opt-in, and people can see it more as a service. If if the court starts giving out rulings that people disagree with or that they don't see make sense, these jurors are kind of at a risk that their financial stake will go down in value, because like this service will be won't be as used in the future. And also there's this kind of game theoretic mechanic of like, if there's a case, like a dispute that gets all the way appealed all the way up until this final dispute, there's kind of a lock-in that happens there. So if you end up in the winning side at that point, these jurors get locked, get their stake locked for a period of time. Right now it's 7 days. So that if the other side decides to leave because it's like proposed first decision, no one really understands what happens there, we kind of give the opportunity to these other people to like exit the system before and sell at that point. So that's kind of like another counter incentive to jurors, kind of like going into producing a decision that isn't seen as the correct one, or like the one that people would expect out of the court. Because if that gets put to that point, even if the majority of the court sided that way, everyone that didn't agree with that can exit before. So these people stand to lose a lot of money.
Okay. Adam, go ahead, follow up, because I'm learning. The whole reason for my show was for me to learn what other people were doing that was cool, and right. I'm learning today. So
I mean, certainly there's a lot of interesting. I mean, I'll go with a question from the chat first, but then I sort of have a rabbit hole to chase down related to what you were just saying. But Scott was asking, just in terms of thinking through the math here, does a person who holds 1 million ANJ have it? Are they going to get selected a disproportionately high number of times relative to somebody who holds 1,000? Or what if a consortium of 10 people has 1,000 each, like
it's very, very good question from
sort
Scott
of asking questions about how if the selection protocol is based on how much you hold, then I have 10,000 or something like that, but I'm never going to get selected in a system where Tim Draper has 1 million.
So it becomes an inequality issue,
right? So then there's jury selection concerns, essentially.
Yeah, as we were saying before, because like you don't have a way to see that that person that has 10K is actually just one person, and they don't have like another 9 accounts with 10K ANJ. And we don't the system doesn't get the identity of anyone or has a way to protect against this type of civil attacks. That's the way that the system currently works right now. If you have 100K ANJ, you have 10 times more odds of being selected than if you have 10K.
And so then I think to what you were saying before, broadly, and this is how a lot of these protocol kind of systems work. Like, the idea is if you want the token to hold its value broadly, to represent the investment that you put into the thing to act as a juror, you want to behave so that you don't get sort of docked, you don't get penalized, but at the same time, you want that token to hold its value in the market. And if the judicial system that you've built around this doesn't work, it's just not going to hold its value in that sense, because people aren't going to interact with the system the way that you want them to in terms of resolving the disputes that you're trying to get to. And I think when lawyers talk about this stuff, you land this is the sort of the rabbit hole that came up in the context of that conversation. So like sort of the answer is, if the system did end up corrupt, right? It's not making good decisions. The token is not worth what we wanted it to be worth. Like, you can imagine how that ends up being a system that's not necessarily making good judgments based on sort of like where we're coming from as lawyers. And at the same time, you can think of example cases where where you can imagine having a mass vote about something would be problematic. There are murder trials every few years that are widely publicized, and everybody hates the guy that they think did it, but lawyers watch it and go, technically under the law, yeah, they had to let him off. There's things around like stand your ground laws and stuff like that, where very often the public is like, yeah, that doesn't feel just to us, and if they all had a vote, this person would be guilty of murder. But then, the case plays out the way it's supposed to, because the court system does work fairly well, even if people don't think it does.
Even if they don't like the result.
They don't like the result, right? And so sometimes as a lawyer, I then have to go, yeah, man, the way you fix that, if you think it's unjust, is like, here are the 2 laws that got to change in that state. But otherwise, those did what they were supposed to, right? And so I think it's why it gets us again to why I think a lot of people bristle at the idea of like, okay, here's a system for making these types of decisions. But I think the broader answer to that, though, is just, these things can coexist, right? Like, I don't think this makes U.S. criminal courts go away, but it might really quickly handle simple disputes over whether or not my Amazon package was delivered on time, right? In a way that we then know is sort of like cryptographically and mathematically verifiably fair in this weird way that has nothing to do with ethics. It's all math. Which certainly gets weird on a lot of levels. Scott was asking, I think, a good question in chat.
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah, it sounded like Jorge. Please, you had some response to Adam's long drawn out theories and enjoyable the rabbit holes that he loves.
You just, when you said Utah,
I let you go.
Gave me permission.
I did. Go ahead, Jorge.
Yeah. So the core reason that we built this was to kind of help out for bringing this dispute resolution in cases where you just cannot use another system. So if you have this digital organization that is not incorporated anywhere, it's just like this DAO, and you need to resolve disputes that are not like that go beyond what the code can do. You kind of need a digital system that is compatible with this organization. You couldn't take it to a traditional court if you have issues with your pure DAO, or like deciding whether a transfer can happen or not. In some cases, because like after something happens, there's just no recourse. And in others, because like you just need a decision before the action even happens. So yeah, that's the main reason that we built this, is that there's things that are inherently digital that just cannot be treated in the traditional legal system, and that's like the main motivation behind building Aragon Court.
I mean, it's right in the name. It's decentralized. Like the way we centralize in our brains is around, in lawyer brains, is around jurisdictions. And so if you have, and yeah, you can force things into regular jurisdictions. Like that's kind of my counterpoint to when I'm fighting trolls in the decentralized space. Sometimes it's like, yeah, but I can tell you exactly the court I'm going to sue you in over this thing, and that's a real world thing. At the same time, like it doesn't mean we can't have coexisting solutions that are wholly digital. And if everybody is essentially contractually agreed that this digital jurisdiction is functional, it's both a very real thing and also sort of a construct in the way that, it immediately gets to that weird metaverse space of like, it sort of just exists in its own space in the ether, like VR. Like this weird digital room that we're all sitting in right now talking on Zoom, right? Like,
well, I think that's a good analogy in many respects, Adam. I know we've got people watching in the Facebook page from all over the world. We've got people sitting anywhere. Jorge's in Switzerland. I'm in Northern California. You're in Southern California. We are technically doing an interview where we're all in the same room. We're decentralized. I mean, it's very... Now you're taking that and you're running with that idea even further. I do have want to thank Colin Levy and Travis Luther and Ashley Pepitone for watching. If you've got questions, please get them in. I know we've been on an hour here. I've gone longer than I told Jorge, but I do. If you have a few more minutes, Jorge, I do want to have you just tell us how we can go and be a juror, because that's really what started me down the journey here. And then with my really highly educated questions for Adam, like, hey, you know the blockchain, right? How do I become a juror? So I want to bring it back. Scott, you've had some amazing questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but maybe you can just walk me through that. I'm all set up now. I've got an Ether, I've got a MetaMask account, put my Ethereum in there. I can actually go and sign up to be a juror now, correct? I have to go and purchase the ANJ token in order to do so. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, in anj.aragon.org, that's where the whole flow for that. So you can go from ANT or other tokens that can get converted to ANT and then to ANJ, and that will get you activated as an Aragon Court juror. And if there's a case in which you then get drafted to participate in a case, people get notified and asked to review the case and make a ruling on it.
Okay, so that for anybody who wants to go and play with this, which was entirely how this came to be for me. It was like I read the article about Draper, so I wanted to go and play, and then I realized that I couldn't play because I didn't have the right setup yet. But it is that simple, and Adam walked me through that. Adam, any final kind of questions to kind of bring this full? I mean, I feel like we could go 3 hours with this, but I don't want to take up all of Jorge's day.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, I think I managed to float out everything that, will get the legal tech and the lawyer community thinking. I think my biggest thing is just, keep it up. I love what you're working on. I love that, that you organically encounter. I wrote a white paper 2 years ago about we're going to need dispute resolution. Here's what it should look like, and you guys are out there getting to build it, which is cool. Just keep it up. And Lexdow will keep using your software and telling you what we don't like about it.
Yeah, no, Lexdow is truly amazing. It's like one of the DAOs that cause more surprises and more great stuff that the team always discusses. So yeah, definitely keep it as well. I think it's super interesting. All the legal hacking work that Lexdow and other folks are doing. And I think it's like that very specific intersection between understanding these things and being able to hack on these things, and also understanding the legal system and being able to hack from these two places that I'm super excited about.
And anything you want to share that we didn't cover, I really want to make sure this is we went a little deeper than and avoided more of the founder journey experience. But is there anything you wanted to share about Aragon.one or the Aragon project that you just didn't get a time to share? In which case, I'm also going to offer up front, I don't always do this, but I would like to have you back in maybe 6 months to see how things have progressed. I'm going to put an open invite when you're ready to come and talk about something. Please reach out. But anything that we didn't cover, and I know there's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, right now the biggest focus for the team is in product wise is kind of finalizing this Aragon agreements piece that will allow Aragon DAOs to kind of like hook into the court and have their own agreements and disputes arbitrated by Aragon Court. So that should be coming out soon. Don't give commit to dates, so no, but super excited about that.
Excellent. And how do people get in touch with you, Jorge, if they have more questions that we obviously weren't able to ask? And I'm sure there's thousands. I need to actually go play with the system. That's how I learn. I just have to dive into it. But how do they get in touch with you if they want to reach out, if they want to be supportive, if they want to try testing out becoming a juror? Tell me how to get in touch with you.
Yeah, for that, the Aragon Discord server is like definitely the best place to be. There's an invitation by going to Aragon.chat, and there's a bunch of Aragon core related channels, and then more general for other things in the project, and also fairly easy to reach out on Twitter at IZQUI9.
That's IZQUI9 on Twitter.
Yeah.
And Adam, any final thoughts there, and then where people can get in touch with you as well?
No, nothing I haven't said already. But yeah, you can get me at the Kerp on Twitter. That's usually the best. And I'm also in Aragon's Discord hanging out, and LexDAO has our own Discord. If you want to check that out, you can go to LexDAO, LEXDAO.chat to join up over there and ask any questions about the weird decentralized lawyering we're poking at there.
And I will post on the Facebook page. I know we're covering a lot of different terminology and sites that probably a lot of us in legal tech are not familiar with. After the show over in the Facebook group, I will add links to these places that Jorge and Adam have, where I'm now spending some time in LexDAO on that server. So I do want everybody to have a chance to look at these things, because these are outside some of our usual legal tech channels. So
and you can ping me in there for, just tag me in the post, and I'll do my best to answer any questions.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Obviously, love talking about it.
And so you can go and find Aragon at Aragon.one. That's the company. And the Aragon project is Aragon.org. That's Aragon.org. And go to court.aragon.org if you want to start looking at how to become a juror and get a feel for how this dispute resolution and these digital courts are working. Blockchain-based digital court using Ethereum. I had to actually go and buy some Ethereum. Thank you, Adam, for helping me expand my my coin portfolio so that I could play this game, what I would think of as a game, but what I'm really interested in the dispute resolution service. So this has been Legal Tech Live, episode 83. We will be back on Thursday night for episode 84. Stay tuned for that. Thank you, Jorge. Don't disappear after we stop recording. And thank you, Adam, for holding my hand through this. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks for having me. A pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you.